You're watching A News. I'm Bakhtiar Sanova, and let's see the top stories. More than 250 killed after Israel hits Lebanon with massive wave of airstrikes after US-Iran agrees ceasefire. Pakistan declares two-day holiday in Islamabad ahead of high-stakes US-Iran talks. And NATO chief says Trump is disappointed with the US allies not joining Iran war. After a last-minute temporary ceasefire deal between the United States and Iran, Israeli airstrikes have hit Lebanon, killing at least 254, with many injured. The ceasefire is at stake, as well as the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran is threatening to close if Israel continues its strikes. This escalation could further dampen peace talks, which is scheduled to be held in Islamabad on Saturday.
Israeli airstrikes have killed at least 254 people and wounded 1,165 across Lebanon, marking the deadliest escalation since a US-Iran ceasefire was announced. The Israeli military said it carried out large-scale strikes on Wednesday, targeting more than 100 Hezbollah command centers and military sites across Beirut, the Bekaa Valley and southern Lebanon, describing it as its largest operation since the start of the US-Israel war on Iran. It said more than 100 locations were hit in less than 10 minutes as explosions lit up Beirut's southern suburbs, with densely populated areas among the hardest hit. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun condemned the strikes, accusing Israel of violating international law and humanitarian principles, and warning they undermine efforts toward regional stability. Prime Minister Nawaf Salam said Lebanon welcomed the US-Iran ceasefire, but accused Israel of continuing its escalation, calling on the international community to intervene. The escalation has also deepened disputes over the scope of the truce. Iranian officials said the United States and Israel had reneged on the terms, arguing Lebanon should have been included, while Israel maintains the agreement does not apply.
But we thankfully at this
US Vice President J.D. Vance said there had been a misunderstanding, noting Iran believed Lebanon was part of the deal. But Washington had not agreed to that.
I think the Iranians thought that the ceasefire included Lebanon, and it just didn't. We never made that promise. We never indicated that was going to be the case. What we said is that the ceasefire would be focused on Iran, and the ceasefire would be focused on America's allies, both Israel and the Gulf Arab states. Now, that said, the Israelis, as I understand it, again, I'm supposed to get a fuller report when I get on the plane, have actually offered to be, frankly, to check themselves a little bit in Lebanon because they want to make sure that our negotiation is successful.
The disagreement has prompted broader international calls to expand the truce.
This is an important step forward. Of course, it is a fragile peace, but we want it to lead to an agreement. The Australian government also firmly believes that this has to apply to Lebanon as well. We want to see peace in this region, and it will make a difference, and I know that many Australians are concerned about the events that are occurring in Lebanon. This is a matter of not just the impact there, but the impact that it's having right around the world.
The United Nations described the wave of strikes as appalling. Oman's foreign ministry also condemned the attacks, calling them war crimes and a violation of international law, and urged global action to hold Israel accountable. The International Committee of the Red Cross said it was outraged by the scale of death and destruction, reporting that heavy explosive weapons struck crowded neighborhoods without effective warnings. It said civilians were rushing to hospitals and searching for missing relatives as conditions worsened. Hezbollah described the strikes as war crimes targeting civilians and said they would strengthen its resolve to continue fighting.
U.S. President Donald Trump said on Wednesday all American ships, aircraft and military personnel will remain in and around Iran until the country fully complies with the agreed deal. He warned that if Iran fails to comply, U.S. forces would respond with overwhelming force. The agreement, he added, keeps the Strait of Hormuz open and bans nuclear weapons, while the military remains ready for any contingency. Ahead of high-stakes peace talks between the United States and Iran in Islamabad this weekend, Pakistan has ramped up security across its capital city. Authorities have declared Thursday and Friday as public holidays in Islamabad. Hira Mustafa reports more.
Islamabad is on high alert ahead of critical peace talks between the United States and Iran. Delegations from both countries are expected in the capital on Friday. The U.S. team will be led by Vice President J.D. Vance, while Iran's delegation is headed by Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Ghalibaf. Formal negotiations are scheduled to begin on Saturday, with Pakistan acting as the mediator between the warring parties. Officials say all eyes are on Islamabad, which is why security has been tightened across the city's red zone, home to government offices and foreign missions. The military is coordinating operations, supported by police teams and paramilitary rangers, in what authorities describe as an unprecedented security effort to avoid any untoward situation. A prominent hotel in the red zone has been vacated and reserved exclusively for the visiting delegations. Meanwhile, a U.S. security team is already on the ground, reviewing arrangements, and high security protocols are reportedly in place for the Iranian delegation. Due to security concerns, officials have not disclosed the protocol's details. Authorities have advised residents to avoid traveling to central Islamabad over the next 2 days, as markets and businesses will remain closed on April 9th and 10th. Zones close to the administrative center of Islamabad are also seeing access restrictions. Officials say that with strong diplomatic ties to both the US and Iran, Pakistan's mediation has placed Islamabad in the global spotlight. Supported by regional powers including Turkey, Egypt and Saudi Arabia, experts say the Pakistani government now faces a tough challenge of turning a temporary ceasefire into lasting peace. Analysts say everything hinges on these talks, which could shape Middle East stability and US-Iran relations in the years to come. Hira Mustafa for A News, Islamabad.
One of Islam's holiest sites, Al-Aqsa Mosque, has reopened in Jerusalem after weeks of restrictions linked to the regional conflict. Worshippers returned early in the morning as access was restored.
The Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem reopened on Thursday after a 40-day closure imposed by Israeli authorities over war-related security measures. Hundreds of Muslim worshippers gathered at dawn for morning prayers, marking their return to the site after weeks of restricted access.
I thank God for opening it for us, and I was prostrating for God in gratitude for opening it, hoping that it will stay open and will not close.
Later in the day, a group of Jewish visitors was allowed into the compound under existing arrangements. Their presence is often seen as sensitive under a long-standing status quo in which the site is administered by a Jordanian Islamic authority, and non-Muslims may visit but not pray there.
Our message is to set out for Al-Aqsa Mosque at all times so that it remains full of worshippers and prayers. May God bless all those who set out for prayers. May God bless them.
The mosque had been shut since February 28th, following Israeli security measures linked to regional tensions, including strikes involving Iran. The closure drew criticism from Muslim communities who view the site as a central place of worship.
Israel's education system is preparing for a phased return to in-person learning following the ceasefire announcement with Iran. Some schools reopened in parts of Israel and Jerusalem on Thursday. Israel said it would start reopening schools in areas considered low risk and in small batches, with a gradual reopening in the coming days. Education officials emphasized that the return will be gradual and flexible, with an initial focus on emotional support. Hybrid learning models that combine in-person and remote learning are expected to continue. Schools were shut down in Israel following attacks on Iran on February the 28th as part of security measures. Tensions are rising between the United States and NATO after President Donald Trump criticized the alliance's limited role during the Iran conflict and signaled possible consequences for some member states. Our U.S. correspondent sent this.
The Trump administration has blasted the North Atlantic Treaty Organization for not supporting the U.S. during Operation Epic Fury, a military campaign against Iran's missile and nuclear development program that has largely seen NATO on the sidelines. New reports suggest that the Trump administration is considering to punish some NATO members deemed unhelpful during the Iran war, including potentially relocating U.S. military bases from Europe. White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt on Wednesday said that President Trump believes that NATO was tested and they failed during the Iran war. That's according to the White House. The increased tensions with NATO come as President Trump and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte met at the White House. Rutte is known for having a warm relationship with Trump, but the president has been increasingly publicly critical of NATO. In recent weeks, Trump has called NATO a, quote, paper tiger that is unhelpful in times of need. Asked by a reporter earlier this month about withdrawing from the alliance, Trump said, "Wouldn't you if you were me?" Trump's conversation with Rutte was described by officials as being, quote, very frank and candid. Trump has called for countries that depend on oil from the Arabian Gulf region to break Iran's chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz. But European countries are unlikely to join mine clearing or other such missions to free up navigations as long as hostilities continue, according to diplomats. During their private meeting, Rutte expressed a shared interest in restoring normal maritime trade after the conflict caused energy prices to spike globally. The NATO Secretary General is believed to have also highlighted steps that European member states are taking in increasing their defense spending. That's something that Trump has repeatedly been pushing for NATO allies to do more when it comes to burden sharing. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is reportedly considering pulling U.S. troops from NATO allies that refused to support the Iran military campaign and redeploying them to countries that backed U.S. military efforts. I'm Ube Shabander, A News, Washington.
Japan's Terra Drone says it's partnering with a Ukrainian company on a low-cost interceptor drone, with interest rising as cheaper aerial threats strain air defense systems.
A Japanese drone developer says it is teaming up with Ukrainian partners to produce a cheaper interceptor drone, as militaries look for lower-cost ways to stop waves of attack drones. Terra Drone says its new Terra A1 interceptor is designed to counter Shahed-type drones, which have been used extensively in Ukraine and are now drawing attention in the Middle East.
So for this current conflict in the Middle East, Shahed drones are flying one after another from Iran toward Israel. People in Japan, and overseas as well, have come to understand just how extremely important these interceptor drones are, especially since missiles are running out in the Middle East.
The company says using expensive missiles against cheaper drones is becoming harder to sustain. Terra Drone says each interceptor costs about $2,500, far less than conventional air defense missiles.
Shooting a Shahed that costs 5 million yen with a missile that costs several hundred million yen, that kind of economic irrationality just isn't feasible anymore. Demand is extremely high, and with the conflict in the Middle East, there is particularly strong interest in this technology.
The Japanese firm entered the military market through a tie-up with Ukrainian startup Amazing Drones. It says Ukraine offers strong drone innovation, but many firms still struggle with funding, overseas sales, and mass production.
In Ukraine, there are many drone companies, about 1,000, and they all have problems. The biggest issues are funding, experience selling overseas, and mass production capacity.
Russia has also reacted strongly. Moscow said on Wednesday it summoned Japan's ambassador over Terra Drone's investment in Ukraine, calling the move hostile and saying relations had reached an all-time low. The Terra A1 has not yet been battle-tested and is expected to be handed over to Ukraine's military for trials in the coming months.
A deadly incident off Calais has underscored the risks faced by migrants attempting channel crossings. It also highlights shifting smuggling routes and tightening coastal security in northern Europe.
4 people died after a group of migrants attempted to board an inflatable dinghy to cross the channel from France to Britain, prompting a rescue operation off the coast of Calais.
There were around 30 migrants who came out and tried to reach a taxi boat, and unfortunately, the boat capsized. They were not successful. They certainly ran into a tidal pool, I think. Then they all fell into the water, and 4 people died. 2 women and 2 men lost their lives.
Over the past year, traffickers seeking to evade police have increasingly used inflatable dinghies to travel along the coasts of northern France and Belgium, picking up migrants along the shore. EU border agency Frontex said the shift to Belgian beaches is mainly due to the intensification of French coastal patrols.
Those smuggling organizations, those criminal organizations, they never take people from the country they were born in to the UK. It's always in bits and pieces, and those people are transported to one place and they have to pay extra to get another part of the transport.
Migrants pay about $2,000 to smugglers with no guarantee of boarding a boat, and sometimes face threats and abuse, including sexual violence, authorities say.
Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss Hungary's pivotal election showdown and its wider European implications. Stay tuned. Welcome back to A News. Let's continue our coverage with more in-depth analysis. Hungary is heading into what could be its most consequential election in over a decade. After 16 years in power, Prime Minister Viktor Orban is facing his strongest challenge yet from opposition leader Peter Magyar, a former ally turned rival who has rapidly reshaped the country's political landscape. This election is not just about Hungary. Orban's leadership has often put him at odds with the European Union, particularly over rule of law disputes, migration policy, and relations with Russia. His close ties with President Donald Trump and continued engagement with Russia amid the war in Ukraine have drawn scrutiny across Europe and beyond. To break this all down, we are joined by Gregory Metsu, political analyst, who is speaking to us from Stockholm, Sweden. Mr. Metsu, welcome to the program and thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot for the invitation.
Thank you. Mr. Metsu, how significant is this election for Hungary, and do you see this election as a turning point, or does Viktor Orban still have structural advantages?
Well, as every election, my first comment is important. It's a moment for the population to express its choice. And I believe that by organizing and steering an election, that's the difference between a democracy and an autocracy. And despite Mr. Orban has been indeed in power for 16 years now, he is organizing the election. It's not happening like that everywhere in the world. It's a turning point indeed, because for the first time, he is really challenged. There is a real contester here, and the difference between both are so-called tied. But Mr. Orban, in my opinion, has still an advantage, because he has a structural advantage. He has been there in power for 16 years. He has been able to build over years a favorable electoral map. He has a deep institutional control and constitutional control. He has a loyal media ecosystem, to be honest. And the Fidesz party is indeed very well integrated in the Hungarian society. So he has a structural advantage for sure.
Mr. Metsu, who is Peter Magyar and how has he managed to emerge as such a strong challenger so quickly?
Well, Mr. Magyar is not an unknown person to Mr. Orban. He's a former Fidesz insider. He was a member of Fidesz, and by saying that, that means that he knows very well how the system is functioning. He knows quite deeply how it is organized, and maybe he has the best tool to counter the presence of Fidesz. He has built this campaign on anti-corruption and social wages, etc. So I'm sure that is also benefiting somehow by what I said in a previous interview on your channel, a certain Orban fatigue. When you have the same person in power for so many years, there is a new generation coming of voters. And maybe those people have enough to see Orban around. So I think that Mr. Magyar is a strong challenger, the first of the kind in a decade indeed.
So to what extent are domestic issues like inflation, healthcare and wages driving voter sentiment?
Well, it's a strong influence. I think we are talking in this election about bread and butter issue. It's a daily concern for Hungarians. It's about economic stagnation, high living costs. The costs are very high and going higher, and probably will go higher with now the crisis in the Middle East. The healthcare system is quite weak, and the performance are not good. The public services are not optimal. So there is these arguments that are promoted by Mr. Magyar to say it's time for a change. And the broader sense of economic fatigue, it's politically damaging.
Mr. Metsu, how much of a role does foreign policy, especially Hungary's stance on Russia and Ukraine, play in this election?
I think indeed it matters, but I'm not quite sure it matters really for the Hungarians. It matters for the observers, the external observers. For the Hungarians, for the voters, as we just said, the daily concern is different than the external policy of Hungary. Of course, Mr. Orban is known and famous for his ties with Russia, but at the same time, he is also close and supported by the Trump administration. It was foreseen that Mr. Vance would come. I think they are a little bit busy right now, but Mr. Orban has support of the US. He has close link with the Russians. He is welcoming Chinese investor. So Mr. Orban is a pragmatic. And by the way, when the EU is ready to distribute billions, Mr. Orban is not so much anti-EU.
So if Magyar wins, what immediate changes could we expect in Hungary's relationship with the European Union?
Let's hope that it would bring a more favorable climate for discussion. Mr. Orban has kind of systematically opposed the general EU policy. He has been even blackmailing because, you know, the system, he has a veto right, and namely for the delivery of substantial funding to Ukraine. He is constantly playing this argument like, I will not vote in favor if you don't give me something. So he's always trading something. So that can change. The question is, what is the place of Hungary in the context of nation? I mean, are they a full member of the European Union and NATO, by the way? They're also a member of NATO. Or are they an independent nation? And if it's so, there was another country recently that left the European Union, the Britons. I mean, so if you are not happy, if you are not feeling at your place, if you are feeling that the policy is not yours, why don't you leave?
So Orban has cultivated ties with figures like Donald Trump. How might a shift in leadership affect Hungary's transatlantic relations? Well,
Mr. Magyar, as I said, is a Fidesz, let's say, former insider. So I hope that he will be having a more balanced attitude. And for instance, when we speak about bilateral relationship, we should always assume that not everybody is in power forever. And one day also Mr. Trump will probably leave the power. So Mr. Magyar will have to build a more, I would say, balanced relationship with the US and the EU, and not to play once against the other, as a member of NATO as well. So, but look, the situation is evolving every day. We have now a very important situation in the Middle East. The Europeans are now criticized very much by the EU, by the US administration. Mr. Trump has no limit in his qualification of the Europeans and the NATO members, but I don't hear him criticizing Mr. Orban, who is a member of the same EU and a member of the same NATO.
Mr. Metsu, what would an Orban victory mean for far-right and nationalist movements across Europe? Because leaders like Robert Fico and Andrej Babiš have echoed Orban's approach. Could this election influence their political trajectories?
That would be a major validation for the far right. Orban has long served as a model for sovereignists, but he, as you mentioned now, not the only of his kind in Europe. You mentioned Mr. Fico and Mr. Babiš. I'm not sure that Madame Meloni could be qualified as a crypto-communist herself. So there are already some, let's say, very conservative leaders across Europe. In France, the National Rally is heading the polls. So there is also this trend across Europe, and this definitely will be a major validation for the far right across Europe, and it would be seen as a model.
And finally, what are the risks of political instability or contested results after the election?
Well, as I said in my first words, it's a democracy, so everybody should respect the result of election on both sides. I don't anticipate major, let's say, chaos or on day one. Mr. Orban has still tools because his party is deeply installed in every level of power. So maybe it will create some problems here and there during the transition, if there is a transition. But I'm not expecting a major dispute. And if I'm cynical, I would say that maybe Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner could come and help to solve the solution if there is a problem.
Gregory Metsu, political analyst, joining us from Stockholm. Thank you very much for your insights and for being with us. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Thanks. Bye.
After the break, we'll take a look at the key stories shaping the region. Welcome back to A News. Now let's continue with our regional stories. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's visit to Moscow reignites a debate as analysts highlight the legal basis for Azerbaijan's territorial sovereignty.
With less than 2 months remaining until crucial parliamentary elections in Armenia, one of Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's central messages has been that the vote represents a choice between peace with Azerbaijan, supported by his civil contract party, and a return to war should the opposition come to power. At the same time, Armenia's relations with Russia and the question of Moscow's influence on the electoral process are coming under increasingly close scrutiny. In recent days, both President Vladimir Putin, who has been engaged in a public exchange with Prime Minister Pashinyan, and the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov have referred back to the 6th of October 2022, when Azerbaijan and Armenia mutually recognized each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty in line with international law and UN principles. Both have characterized that moment as one in which Armenia itself acknowledged Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan, effectively compelling Russia to accept this reality.
If we will consider the dialogue between Putin and Pashinyan, we can clearly see that even with the smile on their faces, they are actually tried to manipulate each other, and the main manipulation of Putin on the Russian side in this dialogue was the topic of the Karabakh, the topic that actually, due to international law, cannot be even talking the status of Karabakh or anything related to the future of Karabakh cannot be talked between Russia and Armenia.
The focus is now on the Prague Agreement of October 2022, when Pashinyan and Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev confirmed commitments to the UN Charter and the 1991 Almaty Declaration, defining the legal basis for bilateral relations and Armenia's acceptance of international law and borders.
I would highlight that by the international law, the Karabakh have never been a zone on, let's say, dispute. It was always a part of Azerbaijan, and Armenia recognized it in Prague. And actually, the Washington summit confirmed that two states are considering each other's and confirming each other's sovereignty, territorial integrity.
Karabakh is treated not as a separate subject of recognition, but as part of Azerbaijan's internationally recognized territory, with historical continuity across different state formations. The agreement also reflects the principle of Euthyphosidatis juris from the 1991 Almaty Declaration, ensuring borders are inviolable rather than recognizing any specific region.
Overall, we should state that, of course, talking about about the Karabakh issue, it should not be on the agenda of the foreign policy of Russia and should not be a topic of discussion between Armenia and Russia. And the second, the Karabakh is the part of Azerbaijan, and only Azerbaijan can talk about it on the international arena, on the bilateral discussions with some countries, but it's not the cup of tea of Russia.
Analysts say the Prague Statement reinforced territorial sovereignty and mutual recognition, providing a legal framework for peaceful relations, while highlighting that Moscow's statements are attempting to shift the focus to political narratives rather than law.
Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev received Turkey's Interior Minister Mustafa Çiftçi on Thursday. During the meeting, Mustafa Çiftçi conveyed the greetings of Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The sides noted that relations between Azerbaijan and Turkey are based on brotherhood and a strategic alliance. They stated that cooperation is expanding across various areas. It was also highlighted that collaboration between the relevant institutions of the two countries is developing. The future of Georgia's deep-sea infrastructure is back in focus as the government announces a major cost reduction and restart of the Anaklia port project, an initiative with significant economic and geopolitical implications. Our correspondent reports more from Tbilisi.
The government of Georgia says it has reduced the cost of the Anaklia deep-sea port project by more than 25%, saving approximately $52.5 million. Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze stated that this was achieved after revising agreements with contractors and supervisory companies, describing the process as serious optimization of state spending. Originally valued at over $200 million for key components such as seabed deepening and breakwater construction, the project is now set to resume in Anaklia in the coming days. However, questions remain about transparency and long-term financial planning. The government has not clearly identified a major international investor at this stage, emphasizing instead that Georgia is open to foreign participation, including from the United States and European partners. Officials claim that multiple offers and tenders have been made, but acknowledge limited visible interest so far. Opposition figures, including Ada Davitaya, argue that delays in the port's development have already weakened Georgia's regional influence. Critics also question whether the government is fully committed, pointing to previous budget cuts and shifting financial figures. Beyond economics, the Anaklia port carries major geopolitical weight. Located on the Black Sea, it is seen as a strategic transit hub connecting Europe and Asia. Debate continues over whether Georgia should prioritize Western investment or risk increased influence from regional powers such as China or Russia. Analysts note that the absence of strong American involvement could shift the balance, potentially affecting Georgia's long-term strategic alignment. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has spoken with his U.S. counterpart about the fragile ceasefire with Iran as Ankara urges restraint and pushes for a lasting settlement. The call comes amid cautious optimism following the announcement of the truce. Here are the details.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan held a phone call late Wednesday with U.S. President Donald Trump to discuss the fragile ceasefire with Iran. In the phone call, Erdogan warned against any actions that might undermine the truce, according to Turkey's communications directorate. Erdogan also told Trump that the ceasefire, which was brokered by Pakistan, represented an important opportunity to reach a permanent peace agreement. Earlier the same day, Erdogan had welcomed the ceasefire, saying it should be fully implemented on the ground without leaving room for what he called provocations or sabotage. The ceasefire, announced earlier this week amid escalating hostilities in the region, has significantly reduced cross-border strikes, although tensions remain high. However, disagreements have emerged over the scope of the truce, especially as to whether it applies to Lebanon. Israeli officials have said that hostilities involving Hezbollah in Lebanon are not covered by the ceasefire, while Iran and others say the agreement should include all fronts linked to the conflict. The uncertainty has raised concerns that continued exchanges of fire along the Lebanese front could undermine the broader ceasefire. Turkey, for its part, has called for restraint across all theaters, warning that any escalation could jeopardize diplomatic efforts. In a related development, humanitarian assistance from Turkey has begun reaching Iran. 3 Turkish trucks laden with medical supplies crossed into western Iran on Wednesday through the Gurbulak border gate in Turkey's eastern Ağrı province. According to state media, the aid convoy was organized by the local health directorate in the Turkish city of Van. This is Adam Maro for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
At least 2 people have died after floodwaters swept away their car in Osmaniye province in southern Turkey. Heavy rainfall caused a stream in the district of Kadirli to overflow, flooding roads and carrying away several vehicles. Homes and businesses were also damaged. In nearby Düzici, a bridge collapsed after a river burst its banks, cutting off a local road. Emergency teams have been deployed across the area, with evacuations and cleanup efforts continuing. Afghanistan's disaster management authorities say a new wave of natural disasters has deepened the humanitarian crisis across the country, with more death, injuries and widespread damage reported in just the last 24 hours. Officials warn the toll could rise further as more rain and flooding are forecast in the days ahead. Our correspondent Tamim Bahiz has the details from Kabul.
Afghanistan's National Disaster Management Authority says at least 15 people have been killed and 18 others injured in the past 24 hours alone, as flash floods, heavy rainfall and related disasters continue to batter several provinces. The agency says the damage to homes has also been severe, with 139 houses completely destroyed and a further 657 partially damaged. According to ANDMA, these latest casualties bring the overall toll from the past 2 weeks to 148 dead, 216 injured and 8 people still missing. Officials say the wave of disasters began around March 26th and has since affected 28 provinces across Afghanistan, from north to south and east to west. The impact has been especially harsh in rural communities where families have lost homes, farmland and livelihoods. Residents in flood-hit areas are also facing mounting financial losses, adding to the strain on already vulnerable communities. The disaster has also disrupted transport and relief efforts. Afghan officials say several major roads, including the Kabul-Jalalabad Highway, the Salang Pass and the Kabul-Herat Highway, were closed because of flooding, landslides and heavy snowfall. The closures are hampering travel and making it harder for aid to reach affected areas. ANDMA is warning that more rainfall and flash floodings are expected in the coming days, fueling fear that humanitarian situation could get even worse. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Kazakhstan says its key oil export route remains stable despite recent attacks on infrastructure linked to the Caspian Pipeline Consortium. Authorities confirmed that supplies are continuing as normal, even after damage was reported at facilities near Russia's Black Sea coast. Our correspondent Fariza Kalimurzina has more from Almaty.
Attacks on the infrastructure of the Caspian Pipeline Consortium have not disrupted the flow of Kazakh oil, with shipments continuing as normal. Kazakhstan's Vice Minister of Energy Sanjar Zharkeshev confirmed this while commenting on the recent incidents. He says Kazakhstan and its international partners are doing everything possible to maintain stable supplies. The comments come after drone strikes on April 5th near Novorossiysk, targeting facilities of the Caspian Pipeline Consortium. Parts of the coastal oil facilities were damaged and several storage tanks caught fire. These strikes come as Ukraine continues efforts to target Russia's oil infrastructure, which it sees as a key source of funding for the war. For Kazakhstan, however, the impact is significant. Experts say that since November 2025, the country has lost more than $2 billion in revenue due to disruptions in oil flows, reduced export volumes, and operational constraints within the system. Around 80% of Kazakhstan's oil exports pass through the CPC system, a strategic route stretching roughly 1,500 kilometers from oil fields in the west of the country to the Black Sea, where crude is shipped to global markets. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss Armenia's election crossroads and its impact on ties with Azerbaijan and Russia. See you shortly.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Welcome back to A News. With Armenia heading toward a decisive parliamentary election on 7th of June, the country stands at a political and geopolitical crossroads. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan is framing the vote as a choice between continuing the current path toward peace with Azerbaijan or risking renewed confrontation if the opposition returns to power. At the same time, tensions between Yerevan and Moscow are once again in the spotlight. Recent remarks by Russian President Vladimir Putin and Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, referring the 2022 Prague Declaration, have revived debate over Armenia's recognition of Azerbaijan's territorial integrity and Russia's evolving stance on the Karabakh issue. As the election approaches, the stakes are high. Armenia's political direction, its peace process with Azerbaijan, and its relationship with Russia could all be reshaped in the coming weeks. Joining us now is Parvana Valieva, a member of the Azerbaijani parliament who speaks to us from Baku. Ms. Valieva, welcome to the program and thank you for being with us.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
So what is the core political message behind Prime Minister Pashinyan framing this election as a choice between peace and war?
Yes, thank you very much for your question. As you outlined that, Nikol Pashinyan, Prime Minister of Armenia, and Russia's Putin had meeting on April 1st in Moscow, and they discussed the process, the relations, cooperation, especially economic cooperation between Russia and Armenia ahead of elections. And they also discussed some issues related to elections. Armenia, the issue is that Armenia is politically moving away from Russia, but economically still depends on it. Armenia's economy currently depends a lot on Russia, so any disruption can hurt economic growth, government finances or balance of payments, the money coming from and also coming out. So that's why this is an issue, and recently S&P Global, this is an international credit organization, also published a report about Armenia's economic growth, and it's heavily dependent on Russia's economy, as well as the economic cooperation, as well as the peace process, normalization process between Azerbaijan and Armenia. So Armenia is trying to diversify closer ties with EU, Western partners, US, as well as they hosting EU missions. But this shift is not complete yet. Despite political distance, Armenia still relies heavily on Russia. For example, let's see the figures, the numbers. 36% of exports from Armenia go to Russia, and 33% of imports come from Russia. 50% of financial inflows from Russia, and 60% of energy depend on Russia. So this is the core issue why Armenia cannot easily separate from Russia economically.
Ms. Valieva, how should we interpret Putin's and Peskov's repeated references to Armenia's recognition of Azerbaijan's territorial integrity? And why is Russia now highlighting Armenia's role in the Prague Declaration, despite having long recognized Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan itself?
Yeah, Karabakh is an integral part of Azerbaijan. It is internationally recognized territories of Azerbaijan, also according to UN Security Council resolutions, 4 resolution. So this is internationally recognized territories. This is our sovereignty and our territorial integrity. So this is not discussable issue. This is cannot be part of the debate, the discussion between Armenia and Russia. Whether which part firstly recognized Karabakh as an integral part of Azerbaijan. But this is not open to any discussions. It is internationally recognized by the world. That's why Azerbaijan Minister of Foreign Affairs also declared that this is not an issue, and this cannot be part of the debate between Nikol Pashinyan and Putin.
So in your view, to what extent has Armenia's foreign policy pivot toward the EU and the West affected its relationship with Russia?
Yeah, Vladimir Putin is saying that Russia and Armenia have deep historical and cultural ties, but he hopes also Armenia's internal politics won't damage relations. So he warned about key issue that Armenia cannot be part of both the European Union system as well as Eurasian Economic Union. They can choose only one. In simple terms, Armenia will eventually have to choose one direction, West or Russian-led bloc. This is their strict their position, and they clearly stated during the meeting. Also, Putin also reminded that Russia supplies cheap gas, cheaper than international markets to Armenia, and this is an important economic benefit for Armenia. And there are a lot of businesses of Armenia in Russia, as well as businesses in Armenia, Russian businesses in Armenia. And they also warned that, overtook Russia Deputy Prime Minister as well as Vladimir Putin. They said that if they not give a room for Russian businesses in Armenia, so we can also, they should also concern about Armenian business in Russia.
Ms. Valieva, if the opposition wins the election in Armenia, how likely is it that Armenia could reverse or challenge its current peace commitments? Could a change in government realistically delay or derail a peace process with Azerbaijan?
Yeah, this is a good question. Well, Azerbaijan position is that this is a strict our term that if they change their constitution, the provision that in their constitution's preamble it says clearly that Karabakh is integral part of Armenia. So this is the call to Miatsum, and we said that if they change the constitution, we will sign the final peace treaty. So changing the constitution is also depend on referendum, as also depend on elections in Armenia. So that's why we also wait for the process. We just to follow the processes related to elections in Armenia. And I think that Pashinyan has not real and as strong as their party in Armenia. There is a Kocharyan there, but he has a very low reputation right now. They have some scandals. Their party has some scandals in the past related to corruption, and that's why this is one argument. And another argument is that right after the 44 days of patriotic war, there was an election, parliamentary elections in Armenia in 2021, if you remember. And at that time, Pashinyan's party also won in the elections. Despite of there has still narrative of having not victory, and they say that they lost their territories and etc. But they won, and that's why I think that there is a chance from Pashinyan side, and we also follow from our side the elections in Armenia.
Parvana Valieva, thank you very much for your insights and for joining us on the program today. We truly appreciate your time and expertise. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you. This concludes our news update for the hour. Thank you for joining us and stay tuned to A News for more.